I'm Maya Blackwell, and I'm 35 years old. I survived the collapse of a burning hotel in Mumbai during a business trip, but I nearly died on the marble floor of my husband's ancestral estate in Charleston. That night, my blood pooled beneath the antique Persian rug that Dominic's family had owned for 4 generations. I had just lost my twin boys, Liam and Noah. The doctors told me to stay hospitalized for at least 72 hours. But Dominic insisted I discharge immediately because he had a charity auction to attend and needed me looking presentable, not pale and weak in a hospital gown. As I hemorrhaged on his grandmother's imported settee, my sister-in-law, Clarissa, didn't dial 911. She stood over me with her arms crossed, her diamond bracelet catching the light, while Dominic yelled, "You did this deliberately, Maya. You've always been jealous that Clarissa carried her pregnancy to term. You couldn't stand seeing her son healthy, so you sabotaged your own." A shove from Dominic sent me tumbling down 3 marble steps. They dragged me to the service entrance and threw me into the November rain with nothing but the hospital bracelet still on my wrist. They assumed I would die in the storm, but they miscalculated. Before I explain how a single recording device buried in my purse brought their pristine reputation crashing down like a house of cards, tell me where you're listening from right now. Stop. If you feel my words, show your support by liking the video and subscribing to the channel. And tell me from which city you belong, so I can see how far a woman's impactful voice can reach. Help me build this community so we can bring more truthful stories for you. Strong. The nightmare didn't begin on that settee. It began 4 hours earlier under the stark white lights of Charleston General Hospital. My doctor, Dr. Patel, had her hand on my shoulder, and her grip was firm, almost desperate. "Maya, your body has been through severe trauma. You've lost a significant amount of blood. You need monitoring. You need rest. You need to stay here for at least 3 days." I wanted to stay. Every cell in my body was screaming for rest. I felt like I had been scraped hollow from the inside out. But standing in the doorway, checking his platinum cufflinks, was Dominic. He wasn't looking at me. He was looking at his phone, scrolling through what I assumed were work emails or social media posts about tonight's event. "Doctor, my wife is resilient," Dominic said smoothly, his voice like silk wrapped around a blade. "She's handled international crisis management for Fortune 500 companies. She doesn't need to be coddled. Besides, this place smells like disinfectant and sadness. We have the Pemberton charity auction tonight. She rests better at home." "This isn't about comfort, Mr. Blackwell." "Doctor," Patel argued, her voice rising slightly. "This is about internal hemorrhaging. This is about her survival." Dominic finally looked up from his phone. His eyes locked onto mine, and in them I saw nothing. No grief for the sons we lost. No concern for my pain. Just annoyance that I was inconveniencing his schedule. "Maya, sign the discharge papers," he said, his tone flat and final. "Stop being dramatic. We have responsibilities. AMA, against medical advice." I signed the papers with a trembling hand, not because I wanted to, not because I thought it was safe, but because 3 years of marriage to Dominic Blackwell had trained me to obey without question. Obedience had become a reflex deeper than breathing. I thought that once we got back to the estate, to the sprawling historic mansion in the heart of Charleston's old money district, the pain would ease. I thought I could rest in our bedroom, away from the harsh hospital lights. I was so incredibly wrong. The ride home was suffocating in its silence. Dominic drove his black Mercedes with one hand on the wheel, the other drumming impatiently on the center console. He didn't ask how I was feeling. He didn't acknowledge that we had just lost 2 children. When we pulled up to the estate, the grand iron gates opened automatically. The mansion loomed ahead, all white columns and perfectly manicured hedges. It looked like a postcard of southern elegance. But I knew better. Beauty can hide rot. When we walked through the front door, my legs buckled. I didn't make it past the foyer. I collapsed onto the velvet settee that sat beneath the oil painting of Dominic's great-grandfather. some railroad tycoon who had built his fortune on the backs of exploited workers. The settee was a pale cream color, imported from France, worth more than most people's cars. I closed my eyes and tried to breathe through the cramping in my abdomen, the feeling that my insides were tearing themselves apart. Then I felt it, the warm, wet sensation spreading beneath me, heavy and unstoppable. I gasped and tried to sit up, but the room tilted violently. When I looked down, the cream velvet was no longer cream. It was crimson, a dark, spreading stain soaking into the expensive fabric. "Dominic," I croaked. "Help me, please." Dominic walked in from the study, a glass of bourbon in his hand. He stopped in the doorway. He didn't look at my face. He didn't look at my trembling hands clutching my stomach. He looked at the settee. The glass slipped from his fingers and shattered on the marble floor. "Are you out of your mind?" he roared, his face contorting into something ugly and unrecognizable. "Do you have any idea how much that piece is worth? Get up. Get up right now. You're destroying a family heirloom." "I'm bleeding," I whispered, my vision starting to blur at the edges. "I need help. Dominic, please." "You're doing this on purpose," he spat, grabbing my arm and yanking me upright with such force that fresh pain exploded through my midsection. "You've always been jealous of Clarissa. You couldn't handle that she gave this family a healthy heir, and you couldn't. So you destroyed yours out of spite. And now you're ruining our home." "No," I sobbed, the accusation hitting me harder than a physical blow. "I loved them. I wanted them. Don't you dare say their names," Dominic screamed. He shoved me hard. I stumbled backward, my feet catching on the edge of the marble step that separated the foyer from the sunken living room. I fell. My back hit the edge of the step, and the crack echoed through the cavernous space. I couldn't breathe, couldn't move. The pain was white-hot, blinding. That was when the door opened and Clarissa walked in. She was wearing a designer cocktail dress, her blonde hair perfectly curled, carrying a Chanel clutch. She took one look at the scene, the blood, the ruined settee, her brother standing over me, and me crumpled on the floor. And she didn't scream. She didn't call for help. She walked over to me, her heels clicking on the marble, and she looked down at me like I was something she'd scraped off the bottom of her shoe. "You always were messy, Maya," she said, her voice cold and precise. "Dominic told me how you looked at my son last week, how you stared at him with this horrible envy. You couldn't stand that I succeeded where you failed, so you got rid of yours, didn't you? And now you're punishing Dominic by bleeding all over his heritage." "I need a hospital," I managed to say, each word costing me more energy than I had left. Clarissa laughed. It was a brittle, humorless sound. "You need a psychiatrist and a maid. Look at this mess. Dominic, we can't have her here tonight. Not like this. Get her out." Dominic reached into my purse that I dropped near the door. He took my phone. He took my wallet. He pulled out a folded envelope and threw it at my chest. "Divorce papers, pre-signed by his lawyer. You leave with nothing," he said, his voice devoid of emotion. "Nothing but the shame you brought on yourself." He grabbed me by the collar of my shirt and dragged me across the marble floor. I tried to hold on to the doorframe, but my fingers were too weak. The foyer was warm, golden, safe. But then he opened the service entrance, the one the staff used, the one that led directly out to the back alley. Gregory, the estate manager, was standing nearby. He was the man I'd brought homemade cookies to every Christmas. He saw me. He saw the blood soaking through my clothes. He saw my bare feet, the hospital bracelet, the desperation in my eyes. "Gregory, please," I begged, reaching out a shaking hand. "Call someone. Help me." Dominic pulled out his checkbook and wrote something quickly. He tore the check out and handed it to Gregory. "She's having a mental breakdown," Dominic said smoothly. "We're handling it privately. Make sure she doesn't come back." Gregory looked at the check. Then he looked at the ground. He stepped aside and held the door open wider. "You need to go, ma'am." The rain hit me like a slap. It was November in Charleston, and the storm was vicious. cold, driving rain that soaked through my thin shirt in seconds. The door slammed shut behind me, cutting off the warm light, the safety. The life I thought I had? I stood in the alley, shivering, barefoot on the wet pavement. I could hear the hum of the city beyond the estate walls, but it felt a million miles away. I started walking. I don't know why. Maybe it was muscle memory from my years managing crises. One foot in front of the other. Keep moving. Assess the situation later. The pavement was freezing and rough against my bare feet. Within a block, I couldn't feel my toes. Within 2 blocks, I was leaving a faint trail of red in the rain. I made it 3 blocks before my knees gave out. I collapsed next to a wrought iron fence outside a small church. The rain was so loud, I couldn't hear my own breathing. I thought about Liam and Noah. The sons I would never hold. At least I'll be with them soon, I thought. I let my eyes close. Then I heard a voice. Hey, you can't stay here. I opened my eyes. A woman was standing over me, holding a bright yellow umbrella. She was older, maybe in her 60s, with gray hair pulled back in a bun and a raincoat that had seen better days. She looked at me, really looked at me, and her expression shifted from annoyance to alarm. "Oh my God," she whispered. "You're hurt." She didn't ask questions. She didn't demand explanations. She wrapped her raincoat around my shoulders, and it smelled like lavender and something warm I couldn't place. "Come on, honey. I'm getting you out of this rain." She helped me to my feet and half-carried, half-dragged me to a small car parked at the curb. The interior smelled like old books and peppermint. As she drove, I looked out the window at the blurred lights of Charleston. I didn't die that night, but the woman who bled on that settee, the woman who believed Dominic Blackwell loved her, she did. The woman who woke up in that stranger's car was someone else entirely, and she was going to make sure Dominic and Clarissa paid for every lie they ever told. I woke up to the smell of eucalyptus and old fabric. It was a scent that should have been soothing, but waking up felt like resurfacing from drowning, painful and disorienting. I was lying on a narrow bed in a room I didn't recognize. The walls were painted a faded yellow, and there were bookshelves crammed with paperbacks and medical journals. A small window showed gray morning light filtering through thin curtains. My ribs screamed with every breath. My hand instinctively went to my abdomen, searching for the curve that should have been there, the life that had been growing. But there was nothing, just emptiness and a dull, persistent ache. I lay there staring at the ceiling, listening to voices in the next room. The card declined again, Thomas. All 3 of them. That was a woman's voice, the same one from the rain. I checked online. He froze everything. The joint accounts, the credit cards. He's claiming fraud. That's my voice, my life, being dissected by strangers. He can't do that. She's his wife. The man's voice was deeper, laced with frustration. He has lawyers, Thomas, expensive ones. And we have a guest room and prayers. I closed my eyes, hot tears sliding down my temples into my hair. Even from across the city, locked behind the gates of his estate, Dominic was still choking the air out of my lungs. People always ask me later, "Why did you stay? You had a career. You were a crisis management consultant. You handled hostile takeovers and corporate espionage. How did a man in a suit break you?" It didn't happen all at once. It happened in increments so small, I didn't notice until I was buried. I thought back to the dinner parties. The way Dominic would place his hand on the small of my back, his fingers pressing just a little too hard when I spoke too loudly or laughed too freely. He would lean in, his breath smelling of expensive scotch, and whisper, "Tone it down, Maya. You sound aggressive. Look at Clarissa. Look how graceful she is. Try to be softer." He took my confidence, the same confidence that had built my career, and turned it into a flaw. If I was organized, I was controlling. If I was spontaneous, I was reckless. And if I ever pushed back, If I raised my voice or questioned his decisions, he had the perfect weapon. "You're having an episode, Maya." That was his ace. He weaponized my past against me. I'd told him, early in our relationship, when I still believed in honesty and vulnerability, about the panic attacks I'd had after the Mumbai hotel fire. I'd been trapped in a stairwell for 3 hours, surrounded by smoke and screams. I'd gone to therapy. I'd healed. But Dominic never forgot. He turned my trauma into a tool. Whenever I got angry at his cruelty, whenever I called him out on his lies, he would sigh dramatically and say, loud enough for anyone nearby to hear, "It's the PTSD, everyone. She's not herself. Just give her space." And I started to believe him. I started to think that maybe my anger wasn't justified. Maybe I was broken. Maybe I was lucky he tolerated me at all. I pushed the thin blanket off and forced myself to sit up. My body protested with sharp stabs of pain, but I needed to face the people who had saved me. I walked into the small kitchen. The woman from the rain was sitting at a worn wooden table, her hands wrapped around a mug of coffee. The man, presumably Thomas, was standing by the stove, flipping eggs with the focused attention of someone trying to control the one thing he could. "Maya," the woman said, standing up quickly, "you shouldn't be up. Sit, please." "I need to know where my sons are," I said, my voice cracking on the last word. "I need to know what happened to Liam and Noah." The silence that followed was deafening. Thomas turned off the stove. The woman, whose name I would later learn was Ruth, reached across the table and took my hand. "Honey," she said gently, "your husband called the hospital this morning. He told them you were too fragile for a funeral. He said you were a danger to yourself." My blood turned to ice. "Where are they, Ruth?" "He had them cremated," she whispered, her eyes filling with tears. "Early this morning. Private service. No guests." The room spun. He had erased them. He had burned my children to ash and scattered them, probably in some corner of the estate garden, without letting me say goodbye, without letting me hold them even once. This wasn't protection. This was annihilation. He wanted to erase every trace of my motherhood, just like he was trying to erase me. I stood up, ignoring Ruth's protests, and walked to the small bathroom. I locked the door and stared at the mirror. The woman staring back looked like a ghost. Her face was gaunt, her eyes hollow. There was a bruise blooming across her collarbone. Her hair was matted with dried blood. She looked like a victim. "Is this how it ends?" I asked the reflection. "Is this the final chapter of Maya Blackwell?" A footnote in Dominic's story, a cautionary tale told at garden parties. My eyes fell to my left hand. The engagement ring glittered under the bathroom light, a flawless 3-carat diamond set in platinum. Dominic had proposed at a rooftop restaurant overlooking the harbor. He'd made sure every table around us could see, could applaud, could witness his grand romantic gesture. But it was never about me. It was always about the performance. I gripped the ring. It was tight, stuck on my swollen finger like a shackle. I pulled. It hurt. It scraped skin. I pulled harder, twisting, ignoring the pain, and finally it came off. I held it over the small trash can next to the sink. This ring could pay off Ruth and Thomas's mortgage. It could buy a decent car. It was worth more than most people earned in a year. But it was cursed. It was a golden cage. I dropped it. It hit the bottom of the plastic bin with a hollow sound that felt like freedom. I looked back at the mirror. The woman looking back was still bruised, still grieving, but her eyes were different now. The fog was lifting. "You didn't survive Mumbai to die in Charleston," I whispered to myself. "You didn't crawl out of that burning building to let a man in a suit burn you alive." I unlocked the door. The war wasn't over. It was just beginning. 16 months. That's how long it took me to rebuild my life from the ground up. 16 months of working 2 jobs, one at a nonprofit handling grant applications during the day, another at a bookstore shelving inventory at night. 16 months of living in a studio apartment above a bakery, where the smell of fresh bread every morning reminded me that life could still be warm and simple. I liked the quiet. I liked the anonymity. Nobody at the bookstore knew I used to negotiate million-dollar contracts, or that I'd once been married into Charleston's elite. To them, I was just Maya, the woman who recommended good thrillers and always knew where the poetry section was. I still went to therapy every week. Dr. Lena Hartman had become my anchor, the person who helped me untangle the knots Dominic had tied in my mind. We talked about gaslighting, about trauma bonds, about the difference between love and control. Slowly, painfully, I was learning to trust my own perceptions again. It was a Sunday afternoon in early spring. One of those rare, perfect days when Charleston shakes off the humidity and the air feels light and clean. I was at the farmer's market near Waterfront Park, browsing handmade soaps and local honey, when I saw him. He was standing at a booth selling wooden furniture, tables, chairs, shelves, all crafted by hand. He was tall, broad-shouldered, with dark hair that curled slightly at the ends, and a beard that looked like it had never seen the inside of a high-end barbershop. He was wearing a faded gray t-shirt and jeans covered in sawdust. His hands were large, calloused, and as I watched, he ran them over a piece of cherry wood with a tenderness that made something in my chest tighten. I wasn't planning to stop. I wasn't looking for anything, least of all another man. But then I saw the chair. It was oak, simple but beautiful, with clean lines and a natural finish. One of the legs had a visible repair, a dark strip of walnut wood inlaid across a crack, forming a kind of butterfly shape. It was stunning. Most people would have hidden that crack, I said, stepping closer. He looked up, and his eyes were the color of warm honey. He smiled, and it reached his eyes in a way that felt unfamiliar and safe. Most people think cracks are something to be ashamed of, he said. His voice was deep and calm, like distant thunder. But I think they're the most interesting part. That's a butterfly key. It's a Japanese technique. You don't hide the break, you honor it. You make it stronger. Stronger how? I asked, genuinely curious. Wood has memory, he explained, running his thumb along the repair. When it breaks, the fibers remember. If you just glue it, it'll break again in the same spot. But if you reinforce it with a contrasting piece of wood, something harder, it becomes stronger than it ever was before. The break isn't a weakness. It's a transformation. I stared at the chair, and I felt something crack inside me. Not breaking, transforming. I'm Owen, by the way, he said, extending a hand. Owen Perry. Maya, I said, shaking his hand. His grip was firm, but gentle, and his palm was rough with work. You make all of this yourself? Every piece. I have a workshop near the old Navy Yard. It's small, but it's mine. There was no pretension in his voice, no performance, just fact. A week later, I found myself standing outside his workshop, holding a broken side table that Ruth had been threatening to throw away. One of the legs had split clean through, and Ruth insisted it was beyond saving. But I wanted to see if Owen was right, if broken things could really be made stronger. The workshop smelled like cedar and linseed oil. It was cluttered in the way that spoke of creativity, not chaos. Tools hanging on pegboards, wood shavings covering the floor, half-finished projects on every surface. Owen was at a workbench, planing a piece of walnut. He looked up when I walked in and smiled. You brought the patient, he said, setting down his plane. Let's see what we're working with. I set the table down. He knelt beside it, running his hands over the split wood with the same reverence I'd seen at the market. It's pine, he said, maybe 60 years old. Good bones, but it's been stressed, probably too much weight on one side for too long. It's broken, I said. The word felt heavy in my mouth. Damaged. Owen looked up at me, and his gaze was steady and kind. It's not damaged. Maya, it's injured. There's a difference. Damage implies it's less than it was. Injury means it can heal. He stood up, brushing off his hands. I'm going to use a combination of butterfly keys and dowels. When I'm done, this table won't just hold weight. It'll hold more weight than it ever did before. And you'll be able to see the repair. You'll know it survived something. Why not hide it? I asked. Why not make it look like it was never broken? Because the break is part of its story, Owen said simply. And stories shouldn't be erased. I stood there in the golden afternoon light, filtering through the dusty windows, surrounded by the smell of wood and oil. And for the first time in years, I felt something other than fear or anger. I felt hope. Owen spent the next 3 hours working on that table. He didn't rush. He measured twice, cut once, sanded until the surface was smooth as glass. I watched his hands, strong, capable, patient. They were hands that built things, not hands that destroyed them. Why do you do this? I asked as the sun began to set. You could probably make more money doing something else. Owen looked at me, wiping sawdust from his forehead. Because broken things deserve a second chance, he said, and because I like making things whole. He wasn't talking about the table anymore. And as I looked at him, standing there in his workshop with sawdust in his hair and kindness in his eyes, I realized something terrifying and wonderful. I was falling for him. Not the way I fell for Dominic, which was a performance, a whirlwind of expensive dates and grand gestures. This was different. This was quiet. This was real. Owen Perry didn't make me feel small. He made me feel like I could be repaired. And maybe, just maybe, that repair could make me stronger than I ever was before. The pregnancy test sat on the edge of the bathroom sink, and the 2 pink lines stared back at me like an accusation. I'd bought the test on a whim after 2 weeks of nausea that I'd tried to blame on bad takeout or stress. But deep down, I knew. My hands were shaking so badly I had to sit down on the closed toilet lid. I pulled my knees to my chest and pressed my forehead against them, trying to breathe, trying to think, trying not to spiral into the dark place that was clawing at the edges of my mind. Because the last time I saw 2 pink lines, it ended in blood and ash. The bathroom walls seemed to close in. I could hear his voice, Dominic's voice, echoing from some locked chamber in my memory. Your body is hostile, Maya. You're too stressed, too broken. You can't sustain life. You're not a mother, you're a graveyard. Stop it, I whispered, pressing my palms against my ears. Stop it. Stop it. But the voice got louder. You killed them. You'll kill this one too. You're cursed. I couldn't breathe. My chest felt like it was being crushed. The white tiles of the bathroom blurred into the white of the hospital room, into the white of the settee, into the white of the cremation paperwork I never got to sign. I was back there. I was bleeding. I was dying. Then the door opened. Maya, you in here? I brought pad thai from that place you like. Owen's voice cut through the spiral. He pushed the door open gently, still holding a plastic bag of takeout. He saw me on the floor, curled into myself, tears streaming down my face. He didn't freeze. He didn't ask a useless question like, "Are you okay?" He set the food down on the counter and knelt beside me. He didn't try to pull me up or fix me. He just sat down on the bathroom floor, his back against the tub, and waited. Maya, he said quietly, look at me. Breathe. I shook my head, pointing at the test on the sink. I can't, Owen. I can't do this again. I'm going to lose this baby. I'm going to kill it, just like Dominic said. Owen looked at the test, then he looked back at me, and his expression was fierce. Dominic is a liar, he said, his voice low and certain. Dominic is a coward who wanted to control you. You listen to me, Maya. You were the strongest person I have ever met. You survived a fire. You survived him. You are not a graveyard. You're a sanctuary. But what if my body fails again? I sobbed. What if I can't? What if you feel my words, show your support by liking the video and subscribing to the channel. And tell me from which city you belong, so I can see how far a woman's impactful voice can reach. Help me build this community so we can bring more truthful stories for you. Owen took my face in his hands, rough and warm, and made me look at him. "Then we face it together," he said. "You're not alone this time, Maya. We're a team. You hear me? We're a team." The next 8 months were a revelation. My pregnancy with the twins had been a performance for Dominic's social circle. He'd insisted I attend every charity gala, every country club brunch, dressed in designer maternity wear that cost more than most people's rent. He monitored every bite I ate, commenting on my weight, my appearance, my worth. My pregnancy with Owen was the opposite. It was quiet. It was safe. There were no galas. There were nights on our worn couch, eating ice cream straight from the carton and watching old movies. When my feet swelled in the 3rd trimester, Owen didn't grimace or make me feel ashamed. He would come home from the workshop, smelling like sawdust and sweat, and he would sit at the end of the couch with a bottle of lotion. He would massage my feet for 20 minutes, his strong hands working out the aches, never once complaining. "You're building a human," he would say when I apologized for being useless. "That's harder than building furniture." And the reading, that was my favorite part. Dominic used to play classical music because he wanted intelligent children. Owen read what he loved. I would lie in bed, my belly enormous and active, and listen to Owen reading aloud from mystery novels and history books. "Okay, little one," Owen would say, his hand resting on my stomach, feeling the kicks. "This is about the Silk Road. It's how people from different worlds found ways to connect. Like your mom and me. Different worlds, but we found each other." He read Agatha Christie. He read about shipbuilders and ancient civilizations. He spoke to the baby like they were already his best friend. But as my due date approached, the fear crept back. The fear that history would repeat itself, that I would hear silence instead of crying. When my water broke, I went cold. The drive to the hospital felt surreal, like I was watching it happen to someone else. Labor was long, 16 hours of contractions that felt like they were tearing me in half. By the time I was ready to push, I was exhausted and terrified. The monitor beeped steadily, but in my head, I was waiting for it to flatline. "One more big push, Maya," the doctor urged. "You're almost there." "I can't," I screamed, gripping Owen's hand so hard I thought I might break it. "I can't do it." "Yes, you can," Owen whispered right next to my ear, his voice steady and strong. "You're a survivor, Maya. Bring her home. Bring her home." I closed my eyes and pushed with everything I had left. I pushed past the pain, past the fear, past the memory of the Settee and the rain. And then relief, sudden emptiness, and silence. For 3 seconds, the room was completely silent. My heart stopped. "It's happening again," I thought. I knew it. But then, a sound, a cough, a sputter, and then a loud, furious, beautiful cry. "It's a girl," the nurse said, beaming. They placed her on my chest, slippery and warm and screaming. She was red-faced and angry and absolutely perfect. I touched her tiny head. I counted her fingers. 10. I counted her toes. 10. Owen was crying. I'd never seen him cry before. He kissed my temple, then kissed our daughter's head. "We did it," he whispered. "She's here." We named her Iris. In Greek, it means rainbow, the promise after the storm. And as I looked down at her scrunched-up face, I realized something profound. This body, the body that Dominic said was broken and useless, had just performed a miracle. I wasn't damaged. I was a mother. And for the first time in years, Dominic's voice in my head had nothing to say. 18 months later, that silence would be shattered in a way I never expected. The azaleas in Marion Square were in full bloom, painting the park in shades of pink and white that looked almost artificial in their perfection. It was a Tuesday morning, warm and clear, the kind of Charleston spring day that made you forget the oppressive summer humidity was just around the corner. I was pushing Iris in her stroller, though she was currently protesting the confinement with enthusiastic kicks and squeals. At 18 months old, Iris was pure determination wrapped in a tiny human body. She had Owen's warm eyes and my stubborn chin, and she had recently discovered the joy of walking, or more accurately, the joy of wobbling toward anything that looked remotely dangerous. All right, you win, I laughed, unbuckling her straps. But you hold Mama's hand. No running toward the fountain. Iris grabbed my finger with her sticky hand. She'd been eating a banana in the car, and my heart did that flip it always did when I looked at her. The simple act of walking in the park without fear, without looking over my shoulder, was something the old Maya would never have believed possible. We turned the corner near the memorial fountain, heading toward the playground, but the path ahead was blocked. A film crew had taken over the walkway, expensive cameras on tripods, lighting reflectors positioned carefully, and a photographer shouting directions like he was shooting for a major magazine. Tilt your chin slightly left. Perfect. Now laugh like you just heard the most delightful news. Stunning. I stopped, planning to find another route. I didn't want to interrupt someone's moment, whatever it was. But then the couple in the center of the shot turned to reposition, and the air left my lungs completely. It was Dominic. He was wearing a charcoal gray suit that probably cost more than I made in 3 months. His hair was perfectly styled, his teeth whitened to an almost blinding degree, and clinging to his arm, wearing a white lace dress that billowed dramatically in the artificial wind from a strategically placed fan, was a woman I didn't recognize. She looked young, painfully young, maybe 25 at most. Her auburn hair was arranged in elaborate curls, and she wore a smile that looked practiced, camera-ready. They were shooting engagement photos. I froze completely. Every instinct I'd honed over the past few years, the ones that told me when to run, when to hide, when to protect myself, they all screamed at me to turn around and disappear. But my feet wouldn't move. Dominic looked up, scanning the area, while the photographer adjusted his camera settings, and then his eyes landed on me. For a moment, his polished facade cracked. The camera-ready smile vanished, replaced by genuine shock that flickered across his features before he could mask it again. I watched him assess me. I knew what he expected to see. A broken woman, defeated and diminished, maybe overweight from stress, wearing thrift store clothes, a living testament to how much better off he was without me. Instead, he saw me in dark jeans and a cream sweater Owen had bought me for my birthday. He saw my hair, which I'd finally cut into a style I actually liked, a shoulder-length bob that felt sophisticated and easy. He saw a woman who wasn't just surviving, but actually living. And then he saw Iris. Iris, who was pointing at a dog across the park and babbling excitedly in her own language, looking cherubic in her little denim jacket and pink sneakers. Dominic's face didn't soften. It hardened. His jaw clenched, and his eyes narrowed with that calculating look I remembered too well. The look of a man doing math, making assumptions, building a narrative that served him. "Okay, beautiful. Let's get a solo shot of the bride by the magnolia tree," the photographer called out. The young woman squealed with delight. "Perfect!" and trotted off with an assistant following behind with the fan and reflector. Dominic didn't follow her. He stepped over a tangle of equipment cables and walked directly toward me. I scooped Iris up immediately, holding her against my chest protectively. She smelled like baby lotion and banana, the scent of pure innocence. Dominic smelled like expensive cologne and something else, something predatory. "Maya," he said. Not hello, not how are you, just my name, spoken like it was an indictment. "You look well. Money suits you." "Move, Dominic," I said, my voice steady despite the adrenaline flooding my system. "We're leaving." He didn't move. He stepped closer, invading my space the way he used to when he wanted to remind me of his size, his power, his control. But I wasn't that woman anymore. I didn't step back. I didn't flinch. His eyes fixed on Iris. He leaned in, studying her face with an intensity that made my skin crawl, like she was an object he was appraising rather than a human child. "She looks at me with such focus," Dominic murmured. "Look at that awareness in her eyes. That's intelligence. That's breeding. You don't inherit intelligence from staring contests. She's a baby. Stop looking at her." Dominic glanced up at me, and a twisted smile played at the corners of his mouth. "She's exceptional, Maya. Sharp features, alertness beyond her age. This isn't the child of some working-class carpenter who smells like lumber and mediocrity." "He's her father," I said, feeling rage build in my chest like a pressure cooker. "Owen is her father, and she's brilliant because she's loved, not because of your imaginary genetics." Dominic let out a short, barking laugh. "Please, I've done my research on your carpenter. The man makes furniture for a living. You expect me to believe he produced this?" He gestured vaguely at Iris. "This child has presence. She has Blackwell features. Maya, admit it. You were already pregnant when you left. You lied about the miscarriage. You stole my daughter and hid her out of spite. The delusion was breathtaking." It was vintage Dominic, the inability to conceive of a world where something good didn't belong to him, where success could come from love instead of money and status. "You're delusional," I hissed, taking a deliberate step back. "Iris has nothing to do with you. We have nothing to do with you." His eyes went dark, the charm evaporating completely. "Did you fake the hemorrhaging?" he said, his voice dropping to a menacing whisper. "Did you lie about losing the twins? Because this is exactly the kind of manipulative, vindictive thing you do. Steal my child and hide her to punish me." "I bled on your grandmother's Settee, Dominic," I said, my voice low and controlled so Iris wouldn't sense my distress. "You pushed me down marble steps. You had our sons cremated without letting me say goodbye. Don't you dare rewrite history." I corrected a hysterical woman who was destroying family property. He countered smoothly, as if reciting a rehearsed script. But this, he looked at Iris again with that hungry expression that terrified me, changes everything. "I can give her the world. Private schools, connections, legacy admissions to Ivy League universities. What can your carpenter give her? Splinters and secondhand furniture?" "He gives her a father," I said, my voice shaking with barely contained fury. "Something you were never capable of being." "Dominic, honey, come here for the couple's shot," the young woman called from beside the magnolia tree, waving enthusiastically, completely oblivious to the fact that her fiancé was currently trying to stake a claim on my daughter. Dominic didn't break eye contact with me. "This isn't finished, Maya," he said quietly. "I don't like people playing with what belongs to me. And I always get what belongs to me." He turned sharply and walked back to his picture-perfect fake life, slipping his arm around the young woman's waist and flashing that million-dollar smile for the camera. I turned and walked fast, my heart hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird trying to escape. I didn't stop until we were 6 blocks away, safely inside a coffee shop. Noah patted my cheek with her small hand, sensing something was wrong. "Mama," she said, one of her first words. "It's okay, baby," I whispered, kissing her soft hair. "Mama's got you. Mama won't let anyone hurt you." But the fragile peace I'd built was shattered. The monster wasn't locked away in the past. He was here, in the present, with a new victim on his arm and a delusional claim on my child. That night, after I put Iris to bed, after I checked the window locks and the door deadbolt twice, I sat in the darkened living room, waiting for Owen to get home from a furniture delivery. My phone buzzed on the coffee table. The screen lit up the dark room with harsh blue light. It was a number I didn't have saved, but I knew who it was before I even opened it. My hands trembled as I read the message. "I know the truth now. I've done the math, Maya. She has my eyes, my bone structure, my presence. You can't hide her from her real family forever. I'm going to get my daughter back. You don't have the resources or the social standing to fight me in court. Enjoy her while you can. She belongs in the Blackwell estate, not above some bakery. I stared at the words until they blurred. Dominic was coming for us. Not because he loved Iris. He never even met her. He wanted her because in his twisted mind, she was a possession he'd been denied. I was an object that had escaped his control, and he couldn't stand it. I took a screenshot of the message and backed it up to 3 different cloud services. Then I opened a new document and started writing down everything I could remember from our marriage. Every incident, every threat, every witness. The old Maya would have panicked. The old Maya would have run. But the new Maya, the one who had rebuilt herself from ash, knew exactly what to do. Come and try, I thought, staring at my phone. You have no idea what you just started. You have no idea who you're fighting now. They say a lie can circle the globe 3 times before the truth puts on its shoes. In Charleston's old money society, lies didn't just travel. They arrived in chauffeur-driven cars and were served with champagne at exclusive brunches. Within 48 hours of our encounter in the park, my phone became a weapon I was afraid to touch. It started with a barrage of messages from people I hadn't spoken to since the divorce. Fair-weather acquaintances who had chosen sides based on bank account balances rather than truth. Maya, is this true? Did you really hide Dominic's child from him? I heard you were unstable after the fire and couldn't be trusted with the pregnancy. That's parental alienation. That's a crime. You know Dominic is devastated, right? How could you be so heartless? Dominic was working overtime, crafting a narrative where he was the grieving, alienated father, and I was the unstable ex-wife who had stolen his child out of pure malice. He was painting himself as the victim of a cruel conspiracy, and the terrifying part was that people were buying it. He had the charm, the credentials, the carefully constructed public image of a pillar of the community. Then came the incident on Highway 17. 3 nights after the park encounter, Dominic was arrested. He'd wrapped his Mercedes around a concrete barrier at 1:30 in the morning. His blood alcohol level was nearly 3 times the legal limit. In any rational world, a DUI would be evidence of a man spiraling, losing control, revealing his true character. But Dominic Blackwell didn't live in a rational world. He lived in a world where money and connections could spin any disaster into sympathy. I saw the interview his fiancée gave to a local news outlet. She stood outside the detention center where she'd just posted his bail, dabbing at her eyes with a monogrammed handkerchief. Dominic is going through an incredibly difficult time, she told the reporter, her voice trembling with practiced emotion. He just discovered he has a daughter he never knew about, a child who was hidden from him for almost 2 years. The grief of missing her infancy, her first steps, her first words, it's devastated him. You made a terrible mistake getting behind the wheel, but it was because he was trying to numb the pain of a father's broken heart. Please respect our privacy as we work to bring his little girl home where she belongs. I threw my phone across the room. It hit the couch cushions and bounced onto the floor. He's a genius, I said to the empty apartment. He turned a DUI into a sympathy campaign. Now he's not a drunk driver. He's a heartbroken father. Owen came out of Iris's room where he'd been putting her down for the night. He'd heard the impact of my phone. He looked at my face and immediately understood. What did he do now? I showed him the video. I watched Owen's jaw clench, watched the vein in his temple pulse. He's a snake, he said quietly, his voice tight with controlled anger. And snakes eventually choke on their own venom. But before the snake choked, it was trying to swallow us whole. The next morning, the legal assault began in earnest. I was at work, helping a client fill out housing assistance forms, when a man in an ill-fitting suit walked into the nonprofit office. He scanned the room with predatory efficiency, spotted me at my desk, and walked over with a practiced smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Maya Blackwell?" he asked, though he clearly knew exactly who I was. "It's Maya Perry now," I said, my stomach dropping like an elevator with cut cables. "I kept my maiden name when I remarried. You've been served," he said cheerfully, as if he'd just delivered a gift basket instead of a legal hand grenade. He shoved a thick manila envelope into my hands and walked out before I could process what was happening. I opened it right there at my desk, my hands shaking so badly I nearly tore the documents. It was a petition for emergency DNA testing, a paternity suit. Dominic was suing for emergency custody pending the results. The language in the filing was brutal and calculated. It claimed I was mentally unfit due to documented PTSD, that I was living in substandard conditions that endangered the child, that I had a history of instability and deception. There were references to my hospital discharge against medical advice, twisted to make it sound like I'd abandoned medical care because I was delusional, rather than because Dominic had forced me to leave. I drove straight to Owen's workshop. When he read the papers, his entire body went rigid. His hands clenched into fists, crumpling the pages. "I'm going to end him," Owen said, his voice low and dangerous in a way I'd never heard before. "I'm going to drive to that estate and make him regret he was ever born." "No," I said, blocking the workshop door. My heart was racing, but my head was clear. "That's exactly what he wants, Owen. He wants you to lose control. He wants a police report saying you're violent and unstable. If you touch him, we lose Iris. We have to fight this the right way, with lawyers and evidence." "The law," Owen said bitterly, slamming his hand against the workbench. "The law costs money, Maya. Dominic has millions, and a team of attorneys who specialize in destroying people. We have a savings account and hope. What are we supposed to do?" He was right, and that was the most terrifying part. We were bringing a knife to a nuclear war. Dominic could bleed us dry in legal fees before we ever saw the inside of a courtroom. I felt the walls closing in. The lies, the money, the system that favored whoever could afford the best performance. That evening, I sat on the floor of our apartment, surrounded by bank statements and legal aid pamphlets, trying to figure out how we could possibly afford to defend ourselves. The phone rang. It was a Charleston area code I didn't recognize. "Hello? Maya?" The voice was elderly, whispery, and nervous. "This is Eleanor Pemberton, from the estate, apartment 12. My breath caught. Mrs. Pemberton was an elderly widow who had lived in one of the smaller units in the Blackwell Estate complex, luxury apartments that Dominic's family owned and rented to select tenants. She was a quiet woman who spent most of her time tending to her rooftop garden and avoiding confrontation. "Mrs. Pemberton," I said carefully, "is everything all right?" "No, dear, nothing is all right." She paused, and I could hear her breathing, gathering courage. "That young girl, the new fiancée, Jennifer, I think her name is, she came to my door yesterday afternoon. She was crying. She asked me if I knew anything about why you left. She asked me if you were really as unstable as Dominic claims." "What did you tell her?" I asked, my heart starting to pound. "I tried to tell her the truth. I tried to tell her you were a lovely woman and that I'd seen things that troubled me. But Dominic, he heard us talking in the hallway. He came out of his apartment. He grabbed her arm, Maya. He grabbed her so hard she cried out. And then he looked at me and told me to mind my own business unless I wanted to find another place to live." "I'm so sorry, Mrs. Pemberton," I said, feeling guilt wash over me, even though I knew rationally this wasn't my fault. "Don't apologize to me," she said, and suddenly her voice wasn't whispery anymore. It was hard as steel. "I need to apologize to you. I saw him that night, Maya. The night he threw you out. I heard the yelling. I looked through my door viewer, and I saw you on the floor bleeding, and I saw him drag you like garbage. And I did nothing. I was too afraid. I kept my door closed. The room seemed to stop spinning." "You saw it?" "All of it," she said. "And I've carried that guilt for 2 years. But yesterday, seeing him grab that poor girl, seeing the fear in her eyes, I realized I can't let him do it again. So I called my grandson. He works in digital archiving. I asked him to help me with something I should have done a long time ago. Mrs. Pemberton, what are you saying? I made copies, dear, she said. The estate has security cameras in all the common areas. Hallways, lobbies, stairwells. The footage gets automatically deleted every 72 hours to save storage space. But the night you left, I couldn't sleep. I couldn't stop seeing your face. So the next morning, I had my grandson go into the building's server room. He works for the management company, so he has access. He copied everything from that night before it was deleted. I've kept it safe all this time, waiting for the day when you might need it, or when I might finally have the courage to do the right thing. My hands were shaking so hard, I nearly dropped the phone. You have video evidence? Yes, and I'm sending it to you. I already have your address from the building records. I hope you don't mind. You should receive a package tomorrow. There's a flash drive inside. She paused, and when she spoke again, her voice cracked with emotion. Burn his world down, Maya. For yourself? For that poor girl he's got his claws in now, and for me. Burn it all down. The line went dead. I sat there in the gathering darkness of our apartment, staring at my phone. In my other hand, I was still holding Dominic's legal papers, his threats, his attempt to take Iris. But now, I had something he didn't know about. I had the truth, recorded in high definition, impossible to deny or spin. He thought he was fighting a war of words and money. He didn't know I'd just been handed a nuclear bomb. Owen came out from putting Iris to bed and saw me sitting on the floor. Maya, what happened? I looked up at him, and for the first time since this nightmare had restarted, I smiled. Call the lawyer, I said. We're not just defending ourselves anymore. We're going on the offensive. The flash drive arrived the next morning in a padded envelope with no return address. It was small and silver, the kind you could buy at any electronics store. But as I held it in my palm, it felt like it weighed 1,000 pounds. Owen and I sat at our small kitchen table, my laptop between us. Iris was down for her morning nap, the apartment quiet, except for the sound of our breathing. Are you sure you want to watch this? Owen asked, his hand hovering over the laptop keyboard. We could just give it straight to the lawyer. You don't have to relive it. I need to see it, I said, my voice steady. I need to know exactly what's on here, what the jury will see, what Jennifer will see. I plugged in the drive. A folder appeared with 6 video files, each labeled with timestamps from that November night. I clicked on the first one. The video was in black and white, slightly grainy, but clear enough to identify faces. The timestamp read 10:15 p.m. The camera showed the hallway outside Dominic's apartment. I watched the elevator doors open. I watched myself stumble out, clutching my side. Even in the colorless footage, you could see the dark stains spreading across my clothing. And then Dominic appeared, grabbing my arm and dragging me. His mouth was moving, yelling, though the footage had no audio. Then came the moment that made Owen turn away from the screen. On the video, I fell to my knees. Dominic didn't help me up. He lifted his foot and deliberately pushed me with enough force that I fell sideways. Then Clarissa appeared in the frame, standing over me, her mouth moving in what was clearly not an offer of help, but a tirade. Finally, Gregory, the estate manager, appeared. I watched myself reach out to him, pleading. I watched Dominic hand him something. The check, I realized. I watched Gregory's face as he made his choice. Then they dragged me to the service entrance and threw me out. The door closed. The hallway was empty, except for a small smear of blood on the marble floor that someone would clean up before morning. If you feel my words, show your support by liking the video and subscribing to the channel. And tell me from which city you belong, so I can see how far a woman's impactful voice can reach. Help me build this community so we can bring more truthful stories for you. I pulled the flash drive out and sat back in my chair. Owen put his arm around me, and I leaned into him, letting his solid presence ground me. But I didn't cry. Tears were for victims, and I wasn't a victim anymore. I was a witness preparing to testify. He told everyone I ran away, I said quietly. He told them I was having a psychotic episode. This proves he threw me out to die. But a video alone might not be enough. Dominic had enough money to hire experts who could claim it was edited or taken out of context. He could claim self-defense or that I'd been violent first. I needed more. I needed a living witness, and I knew exactly who to approach. The email came through my secure account that afternoon. The subject line was simple: questions about accounts. Miss Perry, or should I say Miss Blackwell? I'm Jennifer Ashford, Dominic's fiancée. We haven't met formally, though I saw you in the park. I'm an auditor, and I've been reviewing the household finances before the wedding next month. I found some concerning withdrawals labeled legal retainer and crisis management fees dating back nearly 2 years, right around the time of your divorce. Dominic says you extorted him during the settlement. I need to verify these expenses for the prenuptial accounting. Meet me at Magnolia Coffee on King Street, tomorrow, 3 p.m. Come alone. She wasn't reaching out as a romantic rival. She was reaching out as a forensic accountant who had found discrepancies in the numbers. And if there's one thing you learn in crisis management, it's that following the money always leads to the truth. I arrived at Magnolia Coffee 15 minutes early. It was a neutral space, too public for Dominic to make a scene, too casual for lawyers. I chose a table in the back corner where we could talk without being overheard. Jennifer walked in at exactly 3 p.m. She wasn't dressed like she was going to a society lunch. She wore jeans and a simple blouse, oversized sunglasses, and kept checking over her shoulder like she was afraid of being followed. When she sat down across from me, I could see the exhaustion in her face. The camera-ready glow from the park was gone, replaced by dark circles under her eyes and a tightness around her mouth. "Where is the child?" she asked immediately, no preamble. "Dominic says you're keeping her hidden in unsafe conditions. He says he's been looking for her for months." "Iris is at home with her father," I said calmly, "and her father is Owen Perry." "My husband." Jennifer crossed her arms. "Dominic says Owen is a cover story. He says you were pregnant when you left him. He says you faked a miscarriage to hurt him and then hid his daughter out of spite." I opened the folder I'd brought and slid the first document across the table. "This is Iris's birth certificate," I said. "Look at the date of birth, then do the math backward to conception." Jennifer picked it up. Her eyes scanned the dates, and I watched her accountant brain processing the numbers. "Iris was conceived 17 months after I left Dominic," I explained. "Unless he's developed the ability to impregnate women through telepathy and time travel, that child is biologically impossible to be his." Jennifer frowned. The numbers didn't lie, and numbers were her language. "But he was so certain," she said, her voice wavering slightly. "He cried, Maya. He showed me a picture of you from before. Said you looked pregnant in the photo. He said he remembered every detail. I looked pregnant because I had just given birth to stillborn twins," I said, my voice dropping. I slid the second set of documents across. "These are my discharge papers from Charleston General. AMA, against medical advice. Dominic forced me to leave the hospital 3 hours after I lost my sons. And these," I pointed to the attached medical reports, "are the X-rays and photographs from the emergency room I went to the next day. Blunt force trauma to the ribs, severe contusions, internal bleeding, all consistent with being pushed downstairs and kicked." Jennifer stared at the X-rays. Her hand went to her mouth. "He said you fell," she whispered. "He said you were having a PTSD episode and fell. You were clumsy and unstable. I lived in a ground-floor apartment at the estate, Jennifer. No stairs. And I have video footage that shows exactly what happened. I placed the flash drive on top of the documents. It sat there between us like a lit fuse." "This is from the estate's security cameras," I said. "Mrs. Pemberton in Unit 12 had it archived before Dominic could have it deleted. It shows everything. The blood, the violence, all of it." Jennifer stared at the silver drive like it might explode. Her hands were shaking. "Why are you giving this to me?" she whispered. "You could go to the police. You could go to the media. You could destroy him without warning me." "I will," I said, "but you're marrying him in 4 weeks. And despite what you probably think of me, I don't want another woman to end up bleeding on his floor. I don't want to read about you in the obituaries." Jennifer reached out with trembling fingers and picked up the flash drive. She pulled a slim laptop from her bag. She'd come prepared, I realized. She was already suspicious. She plugged it in, she put in earbuds, and I sat there drinking my coffee, watching her face as her world came apart. It took less than a minute. I saw the exact moment the video showed the violence. Her skin went from healthy to ash gray in an instant. Her eyes widened behind her glasses. She gasped, a sharp intake of breath that drew looks from nearby tables. She watched Dominic drag me. She watched him push me down. She watched Clarissa stand over me. She ripped the earbuds out and slammed the laptop closed with a sound like a gunshot. She sat there breathing heavily, her chest heaving like she'd just run a marathon. Then she looked up at me, and in her eyes I saw what I'd seen in my own mirror 2 years ago, the look of a woman who realizes she's been sleeping next to a predator. "He bought a new settee 2 days after you left," she said, her voice hollow. "He told me it was an upgrade. He said he wanted to redecorate." "That was a replacement for the one I bled on," I said gently. Jennifer reached across the table and grabbed my hand. Her grip was ice cold but strong. "I signed a prenup," she said, and suddenly her voice shifted from shock to calculation. "It has an infidelity clause and a morality clause. If he commits a felony or causes a public scandal that damages the family reputation, the agreement is void and I retain all assets transferred during the engagement period." She looked at the flash drive again. Then she looked at me with eyes that had gone from frightened to furious. "Can I keep this?" I nodded. "It's yours. Make copies." Jennifer stood up and buttoned her coat with decisive movements. She didn't look like a victim anymore. She looked like a forensic auditor who had just found the accounting fraud that would bring down the CEO. "I'm sorry I believed him," she said, her voice hard as diamond. "And thank you, Maya. I know exactly how to use this." She walked out of the coffee shop without looking back, the flash drive clutched in her hand like a weapon. I sat there for a long moment, finishing my coffee. It tasted like vindication. The wedding was in 4 weeks. Dominic thought he was getting a trophy wife and a fresh start. He had no idea he was walking toward his own execution. And I had a front row seat. We didn't attend the wedding. We didn't need to be physically present to watch the detonation. It was a Saturday evening in late April. Owen and I were in our apartment, Iris asleep in her crib in the next room. On our coffee table, my laptop was open, casting a blue glow across our faces. Jennifer had sent me a link that morning. The subject line read simply, "Front row seat." The feed was professional quality, clearly from one of the hired videographers. It showed the ballroom of the Harbor Club, one of Charleston's most exclusive venues. The space was nauseating in its opulence. Crystal chandeliers, white roses in towering arrangements, a string orchestra playing pachelbel. 300 of Charleston's elite were gathered, sipping champagne and waiting to witness the union of 2 prominent families. The camera panned across the front rows. I saw Clarissa in a silver gown that probably cost more than my car. I saw the mayor. I saw business partners and society matrons, all dressed in their finest, all there to be seen. The camera caught Clarissa leaning toward another woman, speaking behind her hand. The microphone picked up her words clearly. "Jennifer is perfect for him," Clarissa was saying, her voice dripping with false sweetness. "Such good breeding. Nothing like that disaster of a first marriage. This girl knows her place. She'll give the family proper heirs." Owen's hand tightened on mine. "Just wait," I whispered. Then the music swelled. The doors opened. Dominic stood at the altar, looking like he'd stepped out of a magazine spread. His tuxedo was flawless, his smile confident, his posture radiating the arrogance of a man who believed he'd won. Jennifer appeared at the far end of the aisle. She didn't look like a blushing bride. She looked like a woman on a mission. Her white dress was elegant and simple, her face composed but unsmiling. Her eyes were locked on Dominic with an intensity that should have warned him something was wrong. The ceremony began. The officiant went through the traditional opening, talking about love and commitment and partnership. Dominic said his vows first. Of course he did. He'd insisted on going first so he could have the spotlight. "Jennifer," he said, his voice smooth and projected to reach every corner of the room, "I promise to give you a life of comfort and security. I promise to be the leader our family needs, to uphold the Blackwell legacy, and to provide you with everything you deserve. I chose you because you match my standards of excellence. Me, me, me." Even in his wedding vows, every sentence circled back to himself. Then it was Jennifer's turn. The officiant nodded to her. "Jennifer, do you have your vows prepared?" Jennifer reached into her bouquet, but instead of pulling out a folded piece of paper, she pulled out a small wireless microphone. She tested it once. Tap, tap, and her voice echoed through the sound system. "Dominic," she began, turning to face not him, but the audience, "you told me you loved me because I was intelligent, because I paid attention to details, because I would be a partner who could handle the complexity of this family." Dominic's smile faltered. "Babe, what are you doing?" "I've been paying attention to details, Ryan." She reached into the bodice of her dress, where most brides keep their vows or a handkerchief, and pulled out her phone. "You promised to protect me, but I was curious about how you protected your last wife." A murmur rippled through the crowd. Several people sat forward in their seats. Clarissa stood halfway up, her face going pale. "Jennifer," Dominic hissed, stepping toward her. "Put the phone away. You're being hysterical." "I'm not hysterical," she said calmly. "I'm reading." She held up her phone, and her voice rang out clear and sharp. "November 14th, 11:07 p.m. This is a text message sent from Dominic Blackwell's phone to his wife Maya, approximately 6 hours after she suffered a traumatic stillbirth. The room went completely silent. Even the orchestra stopped tuning. Jennifer read the words slowly, enunciating each syllable. "You ruined a family heirloom. You bleed on everything you touch. Do everyone a favor and disappear. Don't bother coming back." Dominic's face went white. "That's taken out of context. She hacked my phone. This is, and just so we're all clear on the context," Jennifer interrupted, her voice rising over his, "I thought you should all see why she was bleeding." She pointed a small remote at the massive projection screen behind the altar, the one that was supposed to show a romantic montage of their relationship. Instead, the screen flickered to life with grainy black and white security footage. I watched on my laptop as 300 people simultaneously gasped in horror. The video played without sound, which somehow made it worse. On the giant screen, larger than life, Dominic Blackwell grabbed a woman by the arm. He dragged her across a marble floor. When she tried to stand, clutching her stomach, he pushed her down with his foot. Deliberately, violently. On the screen, Clarissa appeared, standing over the fallen woman, clearly yelling. In the ballroom, someone screamed, "Oh my God, did he kicked her." Clarissa collapsed into her seat, clutching her chest, but nobody rushed to help her. They were all frozen, staring at the screen as it looped. The drag, the push, the fall. The drag, the push, the fall. Dominic stood at the altar, looking between the screen and the crowd. The carefully constructed mask had shattered completely. He looked small, exposed, raw. "It's out of context," he shouted, his voice cracking with desperation. "She was attacking me. She was dangerous. I was defending myself." Jennifer stepped closer to him. The video continued to play behind her, a silent indictment that contradicted every word coming out of his mouth. "You are a disease, Dominic," she said into the microphone, "and I am the disinfectant." She looked down at her left hand. She twisted off the massive engagement ring, the 5-carat diamond he'd probably bought with money hidden from the IRS. "I would rather spend the rest of my life alone," she said, her voice strong and clear, "than spend one more second in the presence of a man who brutalizes women and then plays the victim." She threw the ring. It didn't hit his face. She wasn't aiming for that. It hit him square in the chest, bounced off his pristine white shirt, and clattered to the floor. The sound of the diamond hitting the hardwood echoed in the massive space. Clink, clink, clink. Jennifer dropped the microphone. It hit the floor with a screech of feedback that made everyone wince. Then she turned around, lifted the hem of her expensive wedding dress, and walked back down the aisle. She walked past the horrified guests. She walked past the fainting mother-in-law. She walked past the cameras and the whispers and the collective shock. Dominic was left standing alone at the altar. Behind him, the video continued to play on loop, broadcasting his cruelty to everyone he'd ever wanted to impress. He looked out at the crowd, searching for an ally, for someone to believe him. "She's lying," he said, but his voice was weak now, pleading. "This is a setup. It's a manipulation." But nobody moved. Nobody spoke. The judgment was absolute and final. I closed my laptop. I sat back against our second-hand couch and let out a breath I felt like I'd been holding for 2 years. The tears that came weren't sad. They were cleansing. Owen pulled me close and kissed my forehead. "It's over, Maya," he whispered. "The whole world knows now." Dominic Blackwell had wanted a spectacle. He'd wanted a grand wedding, a display of power and prestige, and he got exactly that. He got the social event of the season. It was also his funeral. They say when an empire collapses, it doesn't happen all at once. It starts with cracks in the foundation, then a crumbling wall, and finally everything comes down in a cascade of dust and ruin. Watching Dominic's life disintegrate after the wedding was exactly like that. Slow, inevitable, and satisfying in a way that felt almost karmic. The video didn't stay contained in that ballroom. It went viral within hours. Someone in the audience had recorded Jennifer's speech and Dominic's exposure on their phone and posted it to social media. By Sunday morning, it had millions of views. Dominic Blackwell became infamous. He became a cautionary tale. He became a meme. The face of privilege and abuse finally getting caught. First came the social death. In Charleston's high society, reputation is everything. It's currency, it's access, it's power. And Dominic's reputation evaporated overnight. The Harbor Club revoked his membership within 24 hours, citing a violation of their ethics clause. Friends who used to laugh at his jokes and drink his expensive scotch suddenly couldn't remember his number. He was blocked, unfriended, and uninvited from every list that mattered. He became a ghost haunting his own social circle, visible but completely ignored. Then came the professional destruction. The board of directors at Blackwell Properties didn't care about Dominic's personal life until it started affecting their bottom line. When investors began pulling out, terrified of the bad publicity and public backlash, the board called an emergency meeting. They didn't just fire him. They triggered the morality clause in his contract, the same kind of clause that Jennifer had in her prenup. No severance, no references. They escorted him out of the building with security guards watching, the same security team he used to bark orders at. But the most devastating collapse was financial. Clarissa, who had enabled and defended her brother for years, found herself caught in the blast radius. The family's real estate portfolio started hemorrhaging money. Properties sat vacant because nobody wanted to be associated with the Blackwell name. Without Dominic's income, and with mounting legal fees from multiple lawsuits, I wasn't the only woman who came forward once the floodgates opened. The family couldn't maintain their lifestyle. The estate was foreclosed on within 6 months. The antique furniture was auctioned off. The Persian rug I'd bled on was probably in some collector's home now, its dark history unknown to its new owner. Clarissa had to move into a modest condo in North Charleston, a neighborhood she'd once called tragically middle class. And Dominic? Last I heard through my lawyer, he was living in a rented room near the port, working as a junior associate at a small real estate firm that didn't Google his name before hiring him. No penthouse, no Mercedes, no power lunches or charity galas, just consequences. 4 years passed, the dust settled, Iris grew into a bright, curious 4-year-old who loved helping Owen in the workshop and reading stories about brave women. I'd been promoted at the nonprofit to director of client services. Owen's furniture business was thriving. He'd been featured in a local magazine for his work incorporating traditional Japanese joinery techniques. We were happy. Actually happy. Not the performative happiness I'd faked during my marriage to Dominic. One rainy Thursday afternoon, my phone rang with a Charleston number I didn't recognize. I almost sent it to voicemail, but something made me answer. Maya? The voice was female, nervous, and vaguely familiar. This is Clarissa. I stared at the phone, my first instinct to hang up immediately, but curiosity kept me on the line. What do you want, Clarissa? I need to apologize. Her voice cracked, and I could hear that she was crying. I saw Dominic yesterday. He's not doing well, Maya. He's drinking heavily. He blames everyone but himself. But seeing him like that, seeing what he's become, it made me realize what we did to you. What I did to you. I stood by and watched him hurt you. I made excuses. I enabled him. And I'm so sorry. I listened to her cry. Part of me, the part that still remembered being that woman on the settee, wanted to offer comfort, wanted to say, it's complicated, or family is hard. But the woman I'd become, the one who'd rebuilt herself from nothing, knew better. Thank you for the apology, Clarissa, I said, my voice calm and measured. I accept it. Really? She sounded surprised, hopeful. Maybe we could have coffee? I'd love to meet Iris. I'd love to. No, I cut her off, but not unkindly. I forgive you, Clarissa, because I need to let go of the anger for my own healing. But forgiveness doesn't mean reconciliation. You watched me bleed and did nothing. I can't have that energy anywhere near my daughter. I genuinely hope you find peace, but please don't call this number again. There was a long pause. Then quietly, I understand. Goodbye, Maya. I hung up. I didn't feel guilty. I felt free. That's what boundaries are. Not walls to keep people out, but fences to keep your peace in. A few weeks later, my lawyer called about revisiting the possibility of a civil suit. We have everything we need, Maya, she said, her voice excited. The video, the medical records, multiple witnesses coming forward. We could get a substantial judgment. We could push for criminal charges. Justice. I looked out the window of our home. I watched Owen teaching Iris how to sand a small piece of wood, showing her the grain, teaching her patience. I thought about Dominic in his rented room, checking his bank account and seeing nearly nothing. I thought about him walking down the street and seeing people recognize him, seeing them turn away in disgust. I thought about him being utterly, completely irrelevant. No, I told my lawyer. Maya, are you sure? He deserves to pay. He is paying, I said. For a narcissist like Dominic, prison isn't the worst punishment. Attention is oxygen to him, even negative attention. If I put him on trial, he gets a stage. He gets an audience. He gets to play the victim again. The worst thing I can do to Dominic Blackwell is be happy. The worst punishment is for him to be forgotten. I hung up. I was done with courts and lawyers and revenge. The war was over, and I'd won, not by destroying my enemy, but by building something beautiful he could never touch. I walked out to the workshop. The smell of sawdust and linseed oil wrapped around me like a brace. Owen was holding Iris's small hand, guiding it along the grain of the wood. See how it flows? He was saying. Wood remembers where it came from. It remembers being a tree reaching for the sun. Our job is to honor that memory and make something beautiful from it. Iris looked up at me and grinned, her face smudged with sawdust. Mama, look, I'm building. You sure are, baby, I said, kneeling down to kiss her forehead. You're building something strong. I looked at Owen, at Iris, at the workshop full of things they'd made together, chairs and tables and shelves, all bearing those butterfly keys, those visible repairs that honored breaks instead of hiding them. 5 years ago, I was lying in the rain, thinking my life was over. I thought I was broken beyond repair. I thought I would never be a mother, never be safe, never be loved. But looking at them now, I realized the truth. Dominic tried to break me, but all he did was clear the ground so I could build something better. I didn't need a mansion or a trust fund or a place in Charleston's high society. I had a daughter who knew she was loved. I had a husband who knew that strength meant building, not destroying. I had a workshop that smelled like possibility, and I had peace, real, earned, unshakable peace. Dominic Blackwell tried to write my ending, but I took the pen from his hand and wrote my own. And my story didn't end with revenge or bitterness. It ended with sawdust and sunrise, with small hands learning to build, with a love that honored scars instead of hiding them. That was victory. That was justice. That was enough. 5 years is a lifetime. In 5 years, every cell in your body regenerates. You become quite literally a different person. I was standing in the produce section of Harris Teeter on a random Wednesday afternoon, trying to decide between regular and organic strawberries, when a shopping cart gently bumped into mine. "Oh, I'm so sorry, I wasn't paying attention." The voice stopped abruptly. I looked up. Standing there in yoga pants and a cardigan, her hair in a messy ponytail, was Jennifer. But she didn't look like the broken woman who'd walked away from an altar 5 years ago. She looked real. There were smile lines around her eyes, a ease in her posture that hadn't been there before. And in her shopping cart, strapped into the child's seat, was a little boy with dark curls and curious brown eyes, maybe 3 years old. "Maya," Jennifer breathed, her eyes widening. I smiled. It came naturally now. "Hi, Jennifer." She abandoned her cart and hugged me. It wasn't a polite society embrace. It was genuine, warm, the hug of one survivor greeting another. When she pulled back, she gestured to the little boy. "Maya, I want you to meet Marcus," she said, her voice soft with unmistakable pride. "I adopted him 2 years ago. Single-parent adoption is complicated, but it's the best thing I ever did." "He's beautiful," I said, waving at Marcus, who immediately hid his face in a package of goldfish crackers. "He saved me," Jennifer said, looking at me with intensity. "But you saved me first. If you hadn't walked into that coffee shop, if you hadn't given me that flash drive, I'd be trapped in that life right now. I'd be hollow, or worse." "You saved yourself, Jennifer," I corrected gently. "I just gave you the information. You were brave enough to act on it." We talked for 20 minutes, blocking the aisle, ignoring the annoyed looks from other shoppers trying to get past us. We talked about preschools and pediatricians and the challenges of single parenthood. We talked about therapy and healing and the surprising joy of building a life on your own terms. We didn't talk about Dominic. He was a closed chapter, a ghost story we'd both finished reading. When we finally parted ways, she promised to call so our kids could have a playdate, and I knew she meant it. I drove home with my strawberries, thinking about how strange and beautiful life can be. The woman who was supposed to replace me had become my friend. We were 2 survivors from opposite sides of the same war, finding peace in the aftermath. When I got home, our house was full of activity. The living room had been converted into an assembly line. Owen was at the dining table, packing boxes with careful precision. Inside each box was what we called a hope kit: toothbrush, toothpaste, warm socks, a prepaid phone card with emergency numbers programmed in, a list of pro bono lawyers, a small journal, and a stuffed animal. This was the Iris Foundation, the nonprofit Owen and I had started 2 years ago. We didn't have millions. We didn't throw fancy galas. We used a portion of Owen's profits from the workshop and my salary. It was small and grassroots. But every box we sent out carried a message to a woman somewhere in Charleston who was terrified and alone. You matter. You're not broken. Keep going. How's inventory? I asked, setting the groceries down and kissing Owen on the cheek. He smelled like wood shavings and hope. We're ahead of schedule, he said. The women's shelter on Morrison Drive needs 15 kits by tonight. They have new arrivals coming in. Mama, Mama. The back door flew open and Iris burst in, her clothes covered in dirt and her hair wild. She was 6 now, all energy and opinions and fearless curiosity. Today, she was crying and my heart lurched. Iris, what happened? I knelt down, immediately going into assessment mode. There was a scrape on her forehead and her jeans were ripped at the knee. I got in a fight, she sniffled, wiping her nose with her muddy hand. Owen knelt beside her, his face serious. You know our family rule, Iris. We use our hands to build, not to hurt. I know, Daddy, Iris said, her chin trembling. But Tommy was being mean to Zoe. He was pushing her off the swings and calling her names and making her cry. I told him to stop, and he pushed me, so I pushed him back so Zoe could get away. Owen and I exchanged a look over her head. I grabbed the first aid kit and started cleaning her scrape while Owen held her hand. Iris, look at me, I said gently. She looked up with those amber eyes so much like her father's. Did you use your strength to hurt Tommy or to protect Zoe? To protect Zoe, she said. Then you did the right thing, I told her, smoothing her wild hair. There's a big difference between being a bully and being a protector. Bullies use strength to make people feel small. Protectors use strength to keep people safe. Today, you were a protector. Like a superhero? Iris asked, perking up. Better than a superhero, Owen said, pulling both of us into a hug. You were a good person, and that's harder and more important. That night, a storm rolled into Charleston. The wind rattled the windows and rain drummed against the roof. But inside our home, it was warm and safe. I sat in my favorite chair, the oak one with the butterfly key repair, the first thing Owen ever fixed for me. It was still my favorite spot in the house. I held a mug of tea in my hands and looked around at the life we'd built, at the photos on the walls of Iris's artwork and family beach trips, at Owen's work boots by the door and Iris's library books scattered on the coffee table, at the beautiful, imperfect, real life we'd created from the ashes of my worst nightmare. I thought about the scar on my ribs from where Dominic had pushed me down those marble steps. It was still there, a thin silver line, but it didn't ache anymore. It was just part of my story now, part of the map of survival written on my body. I thought about something Dr. Hartman had told me years ago. We can't choose what happens to us, but we can choose what we build from the wreckage. Dominic chose bitterness and blame. He chose to be a victim of his own consequences, never taking responsibility, never growing, never healing. I chose differently. I chose to build. Owen came and sat on the arm of my chair, wrapping his arm around my shoulders. Iris is finally asleep, he said. She made me promise 3 times that you weren't mad about the fight. I could never be mad about that, I said, leaning into him. She's learning the most important lesson, that strength should protect, not harm. Like you taught me, Owen said softly, kissing my temple. I looked up at him, this man who had shown me that love didn't have to hurt, that hands could build instead of destroy, that broken things could be made stronger. Thank you, I said. For what? For showing me what a butterfly key looks like in real life, I said. For teaching me that the break is part of the story, that it makes us stronger, not weaker. Owen smiled and pulled me closer. We sat there listening to the storm rage outside, but we weren't afraid. We'd built something strong enough to weather any storm. I wasn't the woman who bled on the settee anymore. I wasn't even the woman who walked away from that coffee shop with a flash drive. I was Maya Perry. I was a mother, a wife, an advocate, and a builder. And I'd built my own empire, not of money or status, but of love and purpose and unshakable peace. The storm could rage all it wanted. I'd survived worse. And on the other side of every storm, there's always a rainbow. If you feel my words, show your support by liking the video and subscribing to the channel. And tell me from which city you belong, so I can see how far a woman's impactful voice can reach. Help me build this community so we can bring more truthful stories for you. Thank you for walking through this storm with me. My story ends here, but I know for many of you, the fight continues. If you're sitting in the darkness right now, wondering if you'll ever see light again, please hear me. You are not broken. You're under construction. And sometimes the most beautiful buildings are the ones that had to be completely rebuilt from the foundation up. You are stronger than you know. You are more valuable than anyone who hurt you ever told you. And you deserve a love that builds you up instead of tearing you down. If my story gave you even a small spark of hope today, honor that spark by sharing this story with someone who needs to hear it. Subscribe to this channel and become part of a community of survivors who refuse to stay silent. Let's build something beautiful together. You are never alone in this fight.